This is a 1992 BMW R100 GS Paris-Dakar. It has quickly become one of my favorite bikes to ride, but you never see it on this channel. And that's because, honestly, I never have to do anything to this. I just ride it. That being said, it is not perfect. It has quirks. The oil change is a perfect example of that. Okay, this part is pretty normal. There's an oil drain plug on the back of the oil pan. You can use an 8mm hex wrench to crack that open, let the oil drain out for a few minutes. Make sure that you reinstall the plug and use a new crush washer. You have a new crush washer, right? Now that you have rendered your motorcycle inoperable, it is time to make sure you have all of the parts, pieces, and supplies needed to do the procedure. These first few steps are more of a guideline, really. So, what parts do you need? Well, that depends. So the crux of the issue about what parts you need is this. BMW used this engine, the Airhead engine, for over 25 years, beginning in 1970 with the R75/5. Now most people will probably call any air-cooled BMW Boxer an Airhead, going back even before World War II, but I'm just talking specifically about this engine design, which, they only used for 26 years over like 40 different models. That being said, I don't expect a 1990s Honda Civic to use the same oil filter as a 2017. It's just that BMW's factory information is not that great to begin with, and you see a lot of really contradictory information on the internet. If you look at the factory manuals, they don't go into a ton of detail about how to do it, but if you check on the internet, people have written veritable books on the subject. Please refer to this handy flowchart I made. That's right, I felt the need to make a flowchart. Now, looking at this thing, it's not that complicated, but the fact that I felt I needed to do this to properly explain myself is, I think, a little telling. And I'm not sure that it's actually totally accurate. To be fair, once you figure out your, path here, it's not going to change. Like, the parts you buy will be the same every time. But I work on multiple different models of Airhead, and it takes me a couple minutes with my thinking cap on to, make sure that I'm doing the procedure correctly. Because failure here means your engine goes kablooey. Can you appreciate how this might be confusing to the average person? So I don't want to tell you what parts you need for your bike. I am going to show you what goes on this bike because there's too many variables. Your 1970 R75 might have, in the 54 years since it was built, gotten an upgrade to the oiling system. I don't know, and I don't want to accept that kind of liability. We're going to work on this 1992 R100 GSPD. With the oil cooler, but not the oil cooler with the filler bolt, and not the flat plate and the white ring of death. Yeah, we'll talk about the white ring of death. Okay, hold on. So this bike comes equipped with an oil cooler. It's this thing right here, and if you look at the bottom, there are two lines that are coming out of it, and they bolt to this plate down here in the bottom of the engine. The filter that we're going to be replacing is behind that. As you can see, there's a bunch of junk kind of in the way, and by junk I mean the right-hand exhaust and the frame of the whole motorcycle. Some people will actually remove this section of exhaust to have an easier time getting to this plate. You don't have to do that, it's not strictly necessary. I'm going to do that because it's going to make things a little easier for you guys to see what's happening. Because I'm nice. I'm nice. So we're going to start by removing the banjo bolts that hold the lines to the plate. Now, again, this isn't strictly necessary. You could just remove the plate and move the whole thing out of the way, but I'm being thorough here. We'll remove the 2 banjo bolts, make sure to get all 4 washers. There's one on each side of each oil fitting. And once the lines are out of the way, then it's time to take the plate off itself. In this case, it's using 3 Allen heads, though in some models it's going to be a hex head. This part is very important. Just take a look at the order in which parts are coming out from behind this plate. There may or may not be a paper gasket. In this case there was. And there's the white O-ring, the square O-ring. There's also going to be a metal shim behind the white O-ring, and then the filter cartridge itself.
So my oil filter cover has a gasket on it, which is not, this particular model is not supposed to use a gasket, so it's interesting that this one has one on it.
Okay, so there's basically like 3 different kinds of filters that the Airheads use. There's the OX35, which is the straight one that's on the shorter side, and that's used for the /5s and the /6s. And then there's the OX36, which is the hinged one, and that's a little bit longer than the straight one, and that's used on the models with the oil coolers. And then there's also the OX37, which is hinged too, but it's the same size as the straight one, and that's used for the ones that are later, but they also do not have an oil cooler, and it's a whole thing. Okay, white ring of death. Most people will refer to this as the $2,000 O-ring, or I guess nowadays the $4,000 O-ring. Oh yeah, because of inflation. Yeah, that's. And the reason being that if this is installed incorrectly, it has the potential to blow your motor up. It will allow oil to bypass the filter entirely, leading to a loss of pressure, something like that. It's bad. You have to be absolutely certain that this O-ring is in the right place as the filter plate goes back on, like you're seeing here. You got to make sure that this doesn't jump off of its mount. Additionally, people recommend that you measure how deep the filter actually sits in its recess, and then you figure out how many metal shims you might need and the paper gasket, etc., so that this O-ring squishes approximately 10 to 20% of its diameter. That's beyond the scope of what I'm trying to say here, but holy shit. Okay, so confession time. This is actually my first time changing the filter on this particular bike, even though I've been riding around for like 2 years. And that is because it had an oil change right before I bought it, including a filter change by a reputable dealer. Or at least I thought so. And the internet, I know that contradictory internet, says that you don't necessarily have to change a filter every oil change. So last season it just got, new oil and I called it good. So this year, new oil, but also new filter, and I'm going to change things up a little bit. These guys, they used the paper gasket. I'm not going to do that. It seems like with the metal shim and the O-ring, like that should be plenty to keep this thing sealed up. If it leaks or I find that I have issues with oil pressure, then perhaps I will change that. Okay, so we finally have everything back together, right? We have our oil drain plug in with a new washer. We have our filter changed out. We've got the O-rings all set. The filter plate is back on. The oil lines are on with their new crush washers. We're good to go. We'll fill the oil, 20W50, 2.5 liters, but make sure that you're paying attention to the fill level on the dipstick, because that's really going to tell you how much you need. I think it's important to prime the oiling system before you actually start the bike and run it. However, the BMW kill switch disallows the use of the starter button. It's not like a Honda CB where you can flip the kill switch and just hit the starter button and have it crank. So what I would suggest doing is removing the float bolts from the carburetors, draining them, and then starting the bike with no fuel in the carb. That way it will, have the same effect. Do that, for a few seconds until the oil light goes away. Check that dipstick again, add more oil if you need to, and then hopefully you're good to go.
What does the PD mean?
PD stands for Paris Dakar, like the rally race.
Yeah.
So this is like supposed to be a homogenization, whatever the word is, so that they could run the big tank and the suspension and all that. But then they got sued by the actual rally because they didn't get permission to use the name. And then they called it PD.
Yeah, we just check the oil and
See how we did?
yeah. Great.
Yeah, got oil pressure.
Yeah, got a battery in it too.
Yeah, that's normal.
Okay, great.
We did it without destroying the engine.
Nice.
So a lot of people like to poke fun at BMWs for being over-engineered, and yeah, there's some truth to that, but I don't think that this is one of those cases, and I'll tell you why. I think that this is the result of the team of engineers at BMW responding to what the market desired: big, heavy touring bikes or off-road bikes that needed to be able to handle heavy loads and slow speeds, necessitating the use of an oil cooler. And the market it wanted more horsepower, it wanted better handling, it wanted a lot of things, and they had to respond to that with the engine that they had available to them. I think by the 1980s, these bikes may have felt a little long in the tooth. They were missing a lot of modern amenities like fuel injection or electronic displays, whatever. And I don't think it's a mistake that the BMW K bikes were released when they were. My point is that this oil change procedure is not what the original designers intended. It's a bunch of extra stuff piled on top that further complicates the matter, and it's not a perfect solution. But, honestly, it's this sort of thing that kind of gives the bikes their character, their soul. I don't know, we call those kind of half-assed eccentricities endearing, don't we? Do you really want to ride a bike with absolutely zero compromises, with everything perfect, not a single problem to be had? Because they already made that bike, and it didn't sell well. They had to get rid of it because it was just, simply put, too good for this world. And that obviously was the Honda Pacific Coast.